Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to ask you to please take your conversations outside. We need to turn the room over for the next group. So, out of respect for our next presenters, please, we encourage you to just take your group conversation and questions outside in the hallway. Thank you very much for assisting us in that. And we are going to start our next group in the next couple of minutes. So, thank you very much for taking your conversations outside. Thank you.
Okay, if we can have everyone take their seats, we'll get started momentarily.
Everyone, just a quick update on the agenda. So not for today, but for tomorrow, there's a Fight from the Mock workshop. That workshop is not happening. So just want to give everyone a heads up. We'll kind of reiterate this a few times, but there will be no Fight from the Mock workshop tomorrow. But with that, let me turn it over to this group.
Thank you, Dan. That's good? Check, check. All right, cool. Wow, look at all these wonderful, brilliant people. This is great. Thanks for coming and listening. It's been said all week, but the group of people in this room and in that hallway and in this building are the people who are going to be doing the things we need to do in too short a time to do it. But I really believe that we're gonna power through this. So let me step back, introduce myself. My name is Tomer Atzili. I am a Noble Reach Scholar at the CIO CDAO. It's a great program. If you don't know what it is, Google it, Noble Reach Scholar. It essentially means that I am a fellow here for a year. It also means that I recently graduated and I studied computer science and AI, and therefore I love Gen AI. My diploma says awarded to Tomer Atzili and ChatGPT. That being said, I think that CDAO is going in a fantastic direction with Gen AI. I think that there is a lot that it can do for Dawn purposes, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. And this project is going to kind of fit into that. And so strategy is great, it's important, we need it, but this project is hopefully going to show you all a little bit about how the actual implementation can work within a strategy, specifically within the Dawn Gen AI strategy that Alicia Scott started to kind of bring up this morning that we're pushing ahead with. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Phil from PIO to give his intro.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Phil Beabout. I'm with the Dawn Performance Improvement Organization. We fall under the Secretariat, under the Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy for Management, Ms. Sandell. For those of you that don't know, we focus on process improvement, performance improvement, strategic management, enterprise risk management, executive analytics like dashboarding efforts, and then also like special projects that are coming down from the Secretary. So that's pretty much like a rough breakdown of the PIO.
Great, thank you, Phil. All right, so let's talk DocBot. What is DocBot? It is a document memo generation project that's being co-run by CIO and PIO for DoesnM and front office staff for the Secretary of the Navy. So we've really got a big question that we're trying to ask is, can generative AI shorten the time spent on repetitive document creation tasks? Now, Ms. Landsberg, if you were in the talk that just happened before now, mentioned that AI is really good in 3 categories: dull, dirty, and deadly. This is the dull. This is the stuff that people are bored with. They're doing it often, but there's time sinks in that. And so Gen AI provides a really great opportunity to skip some of those time sinks, make things faster, and let our really smart people do more important things than changing the names and dates on documents all day. So that's what we're exploring. I want to preface that the project is still in its early stages. We're still doing a lot of exploration on the problem. We're doing a lot of exploration on the solution, and we're going to talk about all that.
Yeah, so like I said, one of the missions inside the PIO is really to reduce inefficiencies. It's to reduce like labor-intensive tasks, and we wanted to remove repetitive and tedious front office tasks. So we kind of wanted to set out to see how generative AI would supplement those. And so we wanted to pull in documents. We wanted to analyze that governance AI. We wanted to look at the test and evaluation guidelines, and we wanted to see, you know, on a microcosm, how we could scale that up into the DoesM, you know, across to other pieces across the organization. So one of the things that we did is we pulled in roughly 1,000 documents looking back about 4 years. We pulled in things from SecNav instructions, action memos, letters of recommendation, awards, you know, even the like the holiday memos that go out saying that, like, oh, you got July 4th off, here's a 96. We pulled in a lot of different things that the front office was doing to see. It was imagine two kind of forks. We wanted to look at it from like a Six Sigma black belt perspective under that DAMIC, you know, piece, looking at the data governance. And then we also wanted to feed the generative AI piece so they could start to learn what those documents were. One of the things that we did discover while we were doing this was that a lot of the documents that were coming into the front office were already pre-made. So they were coming in and they were looking at signatures rather than the actual document creation. So what we're looking at right now is probably a shift in scope, which we'll talk about here in another slide. But yeah, it was a change that we weren't initially anticipating.
So hopefully we've kind of framed the problem in a way that makes sense. We, you know, as Phil mentioned, we're trying to find these time sinks. We're trying to find the repetitive documents. We're looking through signed SecNav documents from the last 4 years to try and identify those and see where GenAI can potentially fit in. That's great. And before I talk about the GenAI piece, I want to take another step back to reinforce the stuff that's been talked about today with our Dawn GenAI strategy. And so what we're really trying to do from the CDAO level is push towards a state of GenAI where we have a vetted suite of enterprise solutions. We're not there yet. Where we are right now is there's a lot of experimentation and work being done around GenAI. There's a lot of active pilots that are in Horizon 2, starting to figure out, you know, how can Navy use GenAI? How can we make sure that it's secure? And then how can we use it to decide faster and shorten the OODA loop with it? So how do we get from where we are now with a bunch of these pilots going on to a vetted suite of offerings is we start doing structured pilots at the Dawn CDAO level. So we start cataloging and inventorying all the efforts going on right now, identifying them, pushing them through a structured pilot program where we're recording the best lessons learned and best practices from all of these pilots and GenAI efforts, and then we'll start to incorporate them into that suite of vetted enterprise solutions that we'll end up with. So we need a lot of buy-in for this. We need a lot of support from the different offices, from the different commands if anybody's working on GenAI solutions for the Navy that they're trying to push forward that they think is going to fit that 80% need that Alicia mentioned earlier. So it's going to be able to be scaled. That's what we're looking for, and together we're going to build better and stronger. And so as we kind of do that, we're splitting GenAI up into a couple different tasks, and this is how Dawn CDAO is looking at it. We start on the left side with kind of all of these are high-value tasks. All of these are really important things that will bring a lot of value across dull, dirty, deadly for GenAI. But we're going to start with the easier stuff, and so that begins with enterprise chat. So think ChatGPT for the Dawn. ChatGPT is, of course, accessible. You can go to Google, you can use it, but you can't put things that aren't distro A on it because it will then train on those and it will become public. And so instead of that, we're going to need something secure, something FedRamped, something in our cloud environment that people can just go to easily and interact with easily. And so we've had a lot of interest in that. We see a lot of pilots going on. We're working on some structured pilots with that right now, and we're getting close. So there's a lot of progress being made on this. I find it very exciting. I hope you guys will too. The second area of GenAI that we've got are tailorable chat workspaces. So this is where this project fits in, and we'll talk a little bit more about that fit later. But essentially what these are is it's for smaller teams who want to interact with huge corpuses of documents. And so anytime you have people looking at these 1,000+ SecNav signed documents and they want to be able to easily query it using some sort of RAG system, which is querying documents on top of a trained LLM, or fine-tuning it on those documents, this is the stuff we're working on, number 2. Again, lots of pilots there. We've identified them. We're working on running them through structured pilots, and we're going to think about enterprising some solutions there coming shortly. And then 3 and 4 are a little bit higher effort, but they're also coming down the line. 3 is deployable chat. So we talk a lot about continuity from enterprise to edge. These chats don't, like, the usefulness of them doesn't stop when we get onto a ship, right? They're vital for our sailors to cut down on some of the repetitive tasks, to cut down on the amount of information that they need to read and policies that they need to understand. And so we want to make sure that there's deployable chat on the edge. With that comes some challenges because our industry partners in an industry setting aren't really focusing on that. Now, we have a lot of industry partners who are willing to do the work with us to make it accessible on our ships, on our subs, and have these LLMs on the edge, whatever that may look like. But we're getting there. And so again, more pilots here, more work being done here. All of these have great projects being done across the Dawn. And so we're going to continue working with these and trying to leverage them to enterprise them. And then lastly, the real sexy word of AI is agentic, right? Everybody's talking about agentic. We want things that can be our personal assistants like you see in the movies, right? Agentic is great. There's a lot of value in it. It will be great once we get it going, but it's a lot of effort. There are pilots in it still, right? They've been mentioned today in a couple of the earlier talks. People are doing agentic in Dawn. It's just a matter of scaling it for our CDAO enterprise approach, and that takes a lot more work because agentic is very fine-tuned to its tasks. So typically fits in that 20%. We're looking how can we make agentic that 80% down the road. And then this slide, I love this slide. I think it encapsulates our approach really beautifully. We are not saying in CDAO, we're not saying to stop the experimentation, to stop playing around with these tools, to stop building these tools entirely, right? Play around with them, experiment with them. You see, I'm going to use this fun laser pointer. You see all of these bubbles over here, right? Our pilots and experiments. Keep doing that. Keep learning from that. But share those ideas. Share what you learn. Share your best practices with both the CDAO and with the other people doing the same thing. There's a lot of important insights that we get from experimentation. There's a lot of great S&T work that you can't build large-scale enterprise solutions without. And so as these are happening, make sure that you are learning as much as you can from them while they're happening. All that being said, we don't want 1,000 flowers blooming. Ms. Rathbun, the CIO, will say that often, right? We have to learn our lessons from the past. We don't want to have to cattle drive 1,000 Gen AI programs that everybody built in siloed environments for their own use cases down the road. And so as we're sharing ideas and thoughts from these pilots and experiments, be prepared to shift to an enterprise approach down the line. So as soon as we have enterprise solutions that fit those requirements that are also coming out shortly for enterprise Gen AI, we're going to launch them. And there's going to be a suite of Gen AI solutions that people across Dawn can go to if they want to use something. If they want to use a normal chatbot like ChatGPT, or if they want to use a tailorable workspace where they can throw in all 1,000 of their PowerPoints or emails. Once those exist, the pilots and experiments should start to sunset for that 80% use case. The 20% still exists. The 20% is always going to be there. We recognize that there's always going to be great S&T work and great research work done for specific use cases, and those are still very valuable. We don't want to lose that. But for the 80%, if your experiments and your pilots fit in that 80%, we don't want to tell you to get rid of it. We want to tell you to tell us about it and let us start to incorporate some of the things and practices that you learned from it into our solutions so that everybody can feel that they contributed and have a say in what's available for everybody. Everybody working for everybody, I like to say. So that's the big Dawn approach for Gen AI. That's the direction we're going. And now that that's out there and that's great, I want to focus back in on our project. Just a quick note on that. When I'm taking questions at the end, I won't be answering them in a ton of detail about this approach because it's more of a CDAO focus, and I'm here really trying to talk about this project and get excited about this project, which is an example of this approach. So try and focus questions on that, but of course I'll answer them all. So moving on. Am I missing? Okay, my slides are a little jumbled. We're going to start with this slide. So this project really is a microcosm of our big Gen AI approach, right? We want a Gen AI solution to help with the $M need to shorten repetitive document creation tasks. And so to do that, of course, we need to use the tech that's out there. We don't have an enterprise solution for Gen AI yet. It's coming, but we don't have it yet. And so how do we deal with that? What do we do next? Well, we talk to people running some of these structured pilots across the Dawn, people who have maybe built environments for other use cases, such as any environments for CNO, any for OpNav, any for NavAir, right? And as we talk to them, we see if their solutions will fit with our project needs. And so we're going to start experimenting, and we're already doing some experimentation with some of these pilots to be able to put in our documents and interact with them in an environment set up for us. And as we do that, we're learning. We're understanding best practices. We're understanding where the gaps are and where the really good things are so that we can feed it into the enterprise solution down the road. And so I encourage anybody else who is working on a Gen AI project to do the same thing, right? To experiment with what's out there now. Don't worry about having to change it later down the road. And then when that comes, change it, right? It shouldn't be too difficult. Ideally, if you're working in that 80%, which this project would be in, once we're down the road, once we have an enterprise solution, you'll be able to transfer any of the learning, any of the fine-tuning, any of the RAG work that you've done, any of the prompt engineering and experimentation, any of the test evaluation, validation, and verification that you've done, all of that you'll be able to transfer along with your project into the enterprise solution. And so that's our plan once those get launched and scaled. Now let me go back to this one first. Now I get to geek out a little bit. So I'm going to try and watch out for your eyes starting to glaze over. I expect that to come in about 5 minutes. Feel free to throw a tomato at me or something if I'm talking too in-depth here. But we got to start playing around with the tech. And the first two things we did is we went to the two most easily available RAG solutions for us. The first one was NotebookLM, which is Google's RAG solution. RAG, by the way, if you're unfamiliar with it, is a way to query a large chunk of documents on top of an existing chatbot. So the chatbot's trained on the whole internet, let's say, and then you can put in your documents and start to ask questions about them, and it will find the specific pieces of information that you're asking about and pull that into its bigger, larger, informed answer. And so Google's built one. It's called NotebookLM. It's great. It's built on top of Google's Gemini foundational model. However, it's public-facing. And so anything I have that's not distro A, which is a large chunk of that 1,000 documents that Phil mentioned, can't go up there. It's only the stuff that we're allowed to release to the public because, again, these are public models. They keep the information that's being sent to them. They train on that information again. And so you can bet as soon as it's going to one of these public models that aren't FedRAMPed, it's out there, and we don't want that. So great technical solution, not great for our Dawn purposes. So we experimented with Nipper GPT as well, which is Air Force's major pilot for a chatbot. And it has RAG built on top of that. Its models, I have Mistral AI written up there, but now I believe they let you choose between Mistral and Llama, which is Meta's solution. And so great models, they can do a lot. However, it's only up to 20 documents. 1,000 documents, 20 documents. That's a tough fit. And so not going to work for our use case. We need something that can hold that big corpus of documents and have great results, but it can also be approved for up to IL5 for any CUI information that we have in the documents that are being generated, created, repeated. And so that leaves us with trying to find, and this is not on the slide, but that leaves us with trying to find solutions that fit with that. And again, Don is piloting a lot of these, and so we've been talking to them, working on trying to find a solution that's coming very, very shortly. Hopefully we'll be able to get into an environment. There were some updates even over the past week on that, and we hope to play around with it as soon as we possibly can. And what does playing around with these look like? There's three main facets of playing around with Gen AI, right? I'm going to start with the bottom because it's kind of the most straightforward. That's hyperparameters, right? So things like with a RAG system, how many documents are you retrieving? I have 1,000 documents in there, right? But when I ask you a question, I want you to look at the 5 most relevant ones. That's a hyperparameter. That's something we can play with. Response length, the number of tokens that your response is giving back. Do I want a really detailed response? I might want that longer. Do I want it shorter? That's another hyperparameter we can play with. There's a couple other ones that I won't get into because I see the eyes starting to glaze. We're almost there, guys. Then we have 2 types of prompt engineering. I'll start with front-end prompt engineering. That's the one you're probably most familiar with. How many people have gone to ChatGPT and just played around with the different responses they can get just from putting things in, right? Talking to it, right? Probably most people. It's going to be the same thing with any sort of system that we deploy. So you're going to have people playing around with how do I phrase this? What details do I include to get the most optimal response for my use cases? We want to make sure we're doing a lot of that on the front end so we can provide some example prompts of here's how you interact with this chatbot so people don't have to figure them out on their own. And then supporting that, we have back-end prompt engineering. So back-end prompts are going to exist on the system and carry across all queries. So anytime you have somebody talking to chatbot, the backend prompt is going to say, listen to what they said, but also consider this, right? So for our use case, it's going to include things like listen to what they said. Also, you're in a role of trying to assist a front office staff member of the Secretary of the Navy who's creating repetitive documents. Make sure you provide information that is relevant to that task, to that goal, and make sure you don't make shit up. They do that a lot. If you tell them not to, it has okay results. It's a big area of research right now with Gen AI, as I'm sure you know, to try and minimize those hallucinations. Back-end prompt engineering can try and help with that, or at least push the model to admit when it doesn't have information about the query, rather than try and make something up for it. And then, once you've done all this experimentation, and during all this experimentation, we have evaluation. So evaluation is a crucial part because how do you know that your model's doing anything good or worthwhile if you're not evaluating it? And so there's a couple different ways you can go about evaluating these kinds of models, starting from ones that aren't going to be as useful and as thorough, but take less effort, all the way up to really advanced testing plans using LLMs as an evaluator. And so I'll talk a little bit real quick about each one of these. So at the bottom, we have the giggle test. This is you're looking at the things your Gen AI model is spitting out, and you're deciding if they make sense or not. In college, I wrote a little LLM. It was pretty much a mini ChatGPT. I trained it on Drake lyrics, and the first time I ran it, I got yeah, 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 yeah. So it wasn't a great song, and that doesn't pass the giggle test, right? So usually these are pretty easy evaluations, and that's what's being done most of the time when we're looking at LLMs, because it's easy, everyone can do it. Everyone can do it really good for their own use cases, right? So you're able to, if you're an expert in front office repetitive documents, you're able to look at the documents it's spitting out, and you're uniquely qualified to decide whether it's a good solution. However, it's not scalable. It doesn't carry across all LLM responses. It's impossible actually to test every single possible response an LLM can give you, because the prompts can change so much and because it's not deterministic. So the same prompts to an LLM will give you multiple different answers every time you give it. And so as we kind of get up there, we start to do more thorough efforts that cover a larger basis of the LLM, including things like governance, so things that are going to be checking that your LLM is used in the right way, that it follows the right policies, that it makes sense to use in this use case, right? And that's something we're actually working on right now as we're developing the technical solution, and Phil will talk a little bit more about it, but we're also really honing in on what the problem is. Where is the time sink? Where can we fill that? And so we're doing that, and then even beyond that, you have test evaluation, validation, and verification, which is a mouthful, so I say TEV instead, and Ms. Landsberg touched on it earlier. But this is really crucial to ensure that our AI is spitting out accurate and tested information. Again, this use case is dull, right? It's not super duper high impact. It's gonna be important, and it's gonna save a lot of time, but if it gives a front office staff member a wrong solution, it's pretty easy to fix. It's not gonna lead to anybody dying. And so TEV might not be as thorough and as intensive as it would be for a situation where you're using AI in a deadly capacity. And then, ideally, we'd have an LLM as an evaluator, right? This is state-of-the-art evaluation for large language models, is using another large language model, a different one, to analyze its responses, because that's scalable, because you can run it 100,000 times in a day and have it analyze every single response and give a score at the end. Again, state-of-the-art, and we're struggling to even get one Gen AI solution to use for our problem, and so having two, a second one to evaluate it, is an even bigger step. But I hope we're gonna get there one day, and like I mentioned earlier, the Dawn CDAO strategy forward is gonna push us there. So, I'm gonna go on. I'm gonna give it to Phil now, who's much more interesting and less technical than me, and he can kind of sum things up and give you some of the lessons we learned.
And Tomer's clearly the smart one out of the bunch. But yeah, so, obviously this is, the project's still in its infancy, right? Like we started at Creston in the planning phase, and we realized some pretty key lessons learned. First and foremost, we want to make sure that we're keeping with the dozen M's, like our PIO policy of trying to reduce inefficiencies, reduce tedious tasks, et cetera. But what we started to notice is when you're working on a project like this, your standard like PMBOK project management methodologies doesn't really fit, because things are kind of changing as you're moving along. Like you really should be focused on like an agile project methodology, looking at like spiral 1, spiral 2, spiral 3. I like to tell people on my crew, Semper Gumby, like you got always flexible. Like you have to be thinking that things are going to change in this, and that standard framework isn't gonna fit neatly into this box. So, like I said, those agile solutions are gonna really be where you fit. Like that's probably one of the biggest things that I've been picking up on out of this, so.
And then another thing we're really learning and honing in on is that governance and test and evaluation should not be an afterthought for a project like this. It's not something we can tack on at the end and say, here, look, we did it, our project's great, right? We learned the same lessons with cybersecurity years ago, that it can't be an afterthought, that it needs to be woven in. And so these things really help ground the project. They really help us understand, is this actually going to help the people that it's supposed to help? Is it working well? Can they use it? Is it the right place for Gen AI? Not everything is the right place for Gen AI, and sometimes you don't know until you try. And so these are going to be kind of grounding and guiding principles as we're working through the project, and they have been already. So I encourage anybody doing one of these projects to really think about that as well. And we're going to wrap it up with kind of where the project is going from here. So we've got a couple next steps. Again, like I said, this is an early project. There's a lot to go still, but we're really trying to push it ahead. It should be an easy win. It should be something that will just take things off the plate for people in the front office, make their lives a little bit easier, and that's something we can do quickly and well, hopefully. And so we have two kind of parallel paths of our first next step. The first is the technical aspect of things. So we're continuing to explore different pilots happening across the Dawn. We're continuing to see if we can find a fitting environment for some of our work, something that can take in these documents and allow users to interact with them. And with that, we're looking for more buy-in, more resources, more funding, as everyone else is looking for, to try and push some of these solutions to a place where they can take in this task as well as hopefully others. And then on the other side of that, we have the stuff that Phil's working on with really trying to find where the biggest time sinks are and figure out what exactly our problem is so we can hit it with pinpoint accuracy. And then after that, we're going to give it to the people, give the tech to the people to play around with it, to mess around with it, to try and break it, right? Because that's how we learn the most. That's how we learn what they really want to use it for, what they really need it for. And until that point, we can't promise that we have a perfect solution. And so we want to get it to that point. We want to let them experiment. And then while they're experimenting, we also want to continuously observe, measure performance, measure time saved, ensure that it's a good solution. We want to check model drift, which is when a model was trained and down the road, the real world looks a little bit different than it did when it was trained. And so now you have models talking like they're your parents. And we don't want that. And so we continuously measure, we continuously update. All of that is super important when you're dealing with any type of AI, but that includes Gen AI as well. And that's all I've got for you, so I'll give some time for questions if anybody has any.
Hey, my name is Peter Hayes. I support OpNav and 216. I had a question for you on that next step slide that you just had up. And not really a technical question, but when we're saying we're allowing front office staffs to play around with it, which front offices? How is that decision made? Do you have an eye at getting it across different front offices for potential scalability down the road? What's the thought process there?
So our project's really honed in on, as of now, I'll say, it's really honed in on SecNav and under SecNav front offices. So the people who are working on these repetitive documents coming into the front office for signature or for creation, right? And so early stages, what our focus is and what DoesnM and PIO's focus is to get it in the front office of the Secretary of the Navy and the Undersecretary to those staff working on specifically document generation. They have a big front office, I know. The ones making the documents, and that's not a final answer because as we're doing more of this project exploration and trying to find out those biggest time sinks, we're gonna get it to the people who have those biggest time sinks.
All right, hey there, I'm Joseph Wilhelm with Jethead Dev, and so just taking a look at everything here, it sounds like for 90% of your use cases, everything could be handled just with Open Web UI. I assume that you've taken a look at that, and have you, by the way, just out of curiosity?
With what? Sorry.
Open Web UI.
I have not.
So just for your knowledge, Open Web UI is the open source community's framework for essentially document generation, locally hosted LLMs. It's been out there for a while. It's very good. It's model agnostic, generally hardware agnostic, using the latest technologies with a lot of like buy-in. That's where I think we're going in the future. So,
Question for you, do you know if it's been used for IL4, IL5 info?
I do not know if it's been used for IL4 or IL5, but that's where the experimentation would go and come in.
Right.
Right.
Okay. I will note that down, and I'll be sure to look into it. Generally, that's been our issue looking at anything public open source is the information that it can't take in. And that's a big obstacle that Gen AI has across DOM. That's probably the #1 obstacle we're having right now.
Well, all of it's hosted locally, right? So at that point, you don't need to worry about that, or am I misinterpreting something?
I will have to check the details again. I don't know the technology, so I can't really speak to its security and how approved it is. But most of these LLMs, to my knowledge, have to be stored somewhere, right? They're not going to fit on a local machine. So they're in some sort of cloud somewhere, and that cloud needs to be FedRAMPed and approved for this higher level information.
Got it. Yeah, I'd love if you have some spare time afterwards, just have a quick chat.
Sure thing.
Hey, appreciate your time. I'm Brendan O'Donnell. We support some customers in Quantico with the Marine Corps. And I've seen a couple of presentations, some great stuff over the last couple of days. My question is as you're building these out, are you having any issues around potential classification by compilation? So we have all these unclassified documents, we're putting them in, we're spinning them around, and we're getting data back from them. We've had some issues where a smart Marine in a seat looks up and goes, hey, that's a great dashboard, but is it okay to put that and that together? And I think there's a real lack of guidance for folks that are doing this kind of work out there. And maybe I'm missing something, but I'm just curious how you're, whether and how you're potentially looking at something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is, to be frank, that's a big issue across DoD whenever we're dealing with Gen AI, right? You take two pieces of unclassified information, you stick them together, or more realistically, the model sticks them together because it doesn't know any better, and all of a sudden you're dealing with TS, right? In our specific use case, because most of the documents we have are pretty low-level CUI, or they have to do with PII, we're not dealing with a lot of national security documents or things that are of higher risk. In addition to the fact that this information is going to people in the front office already working with all of these documents together. So it's something we're thinking about. It's something that definitely we need to talk technical solutions for and people solutions for down the road. But for this specific project, it's not super applicable.
And I would just add, if there's folks in the room who are working on projects having these issues, I'd love to talk to you about that. Because like I said, as you go back, particularly from where you're coming from, I think there is a lack of guidance out there. The stuff that's out there for this problem is focused on 30 years ago and how we did business and not for the future.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So we do a lot of dashboarding efforts inside the PIO, and one thing that we've noticed is that co-location of data, when you start to put it together in the aggregate, is when it starts to hit CUI, secret, top secret, like it starts to, so there's, we struggle with trying to figure out, does ABC, does that equal CUI at this point? And then, is it better if we stamp every page CUI and just, call it good? Or, so I totally understand what you're talking about. So more than happy to talk to you about this afterwards.
Hi, I'm Lieutenant Commander Austin Van Olst. Have you guys thought about any adoption challenges you might have? So as we develop and deploy these new technologies out to a workforce that maybe historically well, just generally a workforce that may be unfamiliar with the technology. Have you thought about how you're going to, try to encourage implementation? And then, what are you going to do if and when, people don't want to use the capability or don't think they're familiar with it enough to be able to actually employ it, day to day?
Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, I mean, whenever you deploy anything, just in general, there's always going to be a subset of people that aren't going to want to use it. There's always going to be that group, we call it the naysayers, that's going to never want to do what you're doing. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with like the innovation process and that kind of stuff, but there's a lot of times that you find with companies and people in my position is that you focus on the people who don't want to use it, and you spend all of your time trying to convince them that it's a good idea, and you've wasted time with other groups of people that would be way more. All right, so not to get on a diatribe with this real quick, but you've got a subset of people that's about 10% that's called the innovators, right? So a new iPhone comes out. That 10% is always going to buy the iPhone. You don't need to market to them any way, shape, or form. They're going to buy it no matter what. Then you got another subset of people that's kind of a more conservative group. They want to hang back. They want to answer. They want to ask questions. They want to get answers to those questions, and then they want to turn around and see what the innovators have done. And then you got another group, which is the naysayers, which is never going to buy into your product whatsoever. What a lot of times you see people do is they focus on those naysayers and they spend all of their efforts trying to convince them, and they're never going to be convinced when they should be answering the questions from that middle subset, which will get you to roughly like 70 to 80% of people using your product. And at some point, those naysayers are just going to get drug along and they're going to have to do it anyways. But we focus too much on that bottom subset rather than answering the questions that people who are more easily going to be like, okay, that's a great idea now. Let me go ahead and do it. So that's kind of my position is we need to, like drill into the people that want to do it, answer the questions for the people who are kind of hesitant about it. And then the people who don't want to do it, like it just doesn't make sense to focus your efforts on that.
And I'll add just
demographic.
one quick thing about that. The purpose of back-end prompt engineering is to have something that exists for every prompt coming in that makes the model perform better, right? And so the goal of that is so that you have users who don't really know how to tailor things for Gen AI really well, able to still interact with it and use it in an efficient format. And so we're hoping that will enable some of that, not necessarily the people who don't believe in it or don't trust it, but the people who maybe just don't know how to use it. We're hoping that will help enable them. In addition, for the people who don't trust it, that's why we're putting in a lot of this TEV stuff. That's why we're focusing on really analyzing our results and making sure that they're good. Because if you can prove that 95% of your results were accurate, and you have a way to flag that 5% or something like that, it gets a lot more trust than a system that you're just saying, go out there and play with it.
Hey, how's it going? Danny Bethke. I had a question, and sorry, I came in partially through you already started, so not sure if you touched on this at all. But have you thought about potentially deploying this like within the enterprise analytical platform like Jupyter, so that we can go out and utilize that data in Jupyter through Gen AI?
In terms of deploying it enterprise-wide, that would be great down the road. Again, this is a microcosm of our Dawn Gen AI strategy and approach. And so as more Gen AI solutions become available at an enterprise scale, we'll transfer what we've learned from this project to those so that people will be able to put in their own data and maybe use some of the lessons learned from prompt engineering or hyperparameters that we built in that wherever they are with whatever data they have. In terms of integrating it with Jupyter, it's not something we've thought of yet. It could be a great addition down the road. And so that's a good idea, something we'll look into. And that's part of why we're here and why we're doing this presentation, is to get these ideas, to get these suggestions, and to get your viewpoints on where we could go, things that would be useful for you to come out of a project we're doing right now to explore.
Thank you. Hopefully I'm the last question. It's more about scope. Your focus is on your project, which is a N1 administrative burden. That can't be replicated through many different divisions. Similar type of issues come up in several different things like contract management or technical solutions for how to get to something because there's so many UFCs out there or some other thing, right? Your vision is to say, here admin is a bot that you can use, and here N4 or N3, here's a bot that you can use in your environment within your enterprise enclave? Or are you looking at a giant bot that goes across all of the branches as one big data repo? Because I think if you can define this is limited scope to just admin, or this is limited scope to just facilities or something.
Yeah.
Your scope is it a scope or is it a wide breadth? That's what I'm going for.
So this project is, it came about because it was thought of and tasked by Dozen M. And so she's really focused on where it can save time sinks in this scope that we've explained, right? In front office for SecNav and under SecNav. And so that's really where we're aiming this project. Now, when I talk about the big Gen AI approach, that scope is dawn-wide, right? And so down the road, hopefully there will be something where, people who are doing the similar kind of tasks, right? Repetitive document generation. They can go to an environment hosted on an enterprise scale and put in their own documents and then interact with them how they'd like. And they can take lessons learned from us through communication, because that's key, to build up their prompts, back-end prompt engineering, front-end prompt engineering, their hyperparameters, the things that you're really tweaking when you're dealing with experimentation on an LLM because you're not going out and building it yourself. Does that make sense? All right, great. Well, thank you, everybody. This was really great. I love the feedback, and we're happy to take any questions offline.